I caught my husband with my son's fiancée 2 hours before the wedding. I was going to scream, but my son stopped me. He whispered, "Mom, I already knew, and it's worse than you think." Hello, everyone. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is about a mother who turned her pain into power, a son who chose truth over silence, and a secret daughter hidden for 15 years. What happened next? I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I gathered proof. I called my sister, a detective, and on the day of the wedding, I destroyed everything. They thought they'd get away with it. They thought the wedding would seal their lies, but they forgot one thing. I was the soil. And when the storm came, I became the fire. This is the story of how I took back my life, one truth at a time. On the morning of my son's wedding, I woke at 5 a.m. Sleep had abandoned me hours ago. I told myself it was just nerves, the kind any mother feels on a day like this. But deep down, something heavier coiled in my chest, a quiet dread I couldn't name. I sat in my home office, bathed in the pale blue glow of my laptop screen. Spreadsheets blurred before my eyes. I run a small CPA firm from here. Nothing flashy, but it paid for Nate's college tuition and covered the gaps Richard's salary never quite filled. Outside, Charleston slept beneath a velvet sky. But in my mind, the patio was already alive. White chairs in perfect rows, string lights glinting like stars, the rose arch I'd nurtured from thorny saplings now in full bloom. Everything had to be perfect. Nate deserved that. 25 years married to Richard, 23 years raising Nate. I'd been the planner, the rememberer of dentist appointments and birthdays, the one who balanced the checkbook while Richard charmed dinner guests and told stories that made strangers feel like family. He was the sun, I was the soil. And for a long time, that balance felt like love. But lately, something had shifted. A silence had grown between us, subtle at first, then suffocating. He'd stopped talking when I entered a room. His phone would tilt away from me. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd laugh it off. "Just work, honey. Big promotion on the line." I chose to believe him. What else could I do? You don't burn 25 years over a hunch. The soft click of my office door pulled me back. Nate stood there in rumpled pajamas, holding a steaming mug. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. At 23, he had my practicality, but Richard's sharp jawline and easy grace. "Mom, you've been up for hours," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "The wedding's not until 4. "I just want everything perfect for my boy," I said, forcing a smile as I closed my laptop. "Dad's already gone," he replied, his tone oddly flat. "Said he had to pick up a last-minute gift for Leela's parents, the Ellingtons." I frowned. That was news to me. He sat on the edge of my desk, suddenly looking like the little boy who used to climb into my lap after nightmares. "Mom, can I ask you something?" I turned my chair to face him. Under the harsh desk lamp, his worry was raw. "What's on your mind, sweetie?" He took a shaky breath. "Do you think Leela really loves me?" The question hit like a punch. Leela, beautiful, ambitious, a rising star at a prestigious architecture firm. On paper, she was perfect. But I'd noticed things too, how her gaze drifted during Nate's stories, how her phone buzzed constantly at dinner, how she'd light up whenever Richard walked into the room. "Why would you ask that? It's your wedding day." "I know," he mumbled, staring into his coffee. "Maybe it's just jitters, but sometimes when she looks at me, it's like I'm not really there. Like I'm just a step on her path to the life she's always wanted." He paused. "And lately, She's been spending a lot of time with Dad, always talking finances, investments. Says he's mentoring her. I almost told him what I'd seen. How Richard's eyes followed Leela like she was the only woman in the room. How he remembered her coffee order, 2 sugars, splash of milk, without being asked. How he'd hovered near her at every family gathering, adjusting her chair, refilling her wine. Instead, I squeezed his hand. Wedding jitters are normal, Nate. Marriage is the biggest leap you'll ever take. It's not just jitters, Mom, he whispered, voice cracking. He looked up, eyes glistening. I think she's in love with someone else. My blood turned to ice. What makes you say that? Little things, he said, shoulders slumping. The way she smiles when Dad calls. How she asks about him first when she visits. Yesterday, I saw them in the garden, just talking. But the way he looked at her... He swallowed hard. It wasn't how a father-in-law should look at his son's fiancée. I forced calm into my voice. Nate, that's a serious accusation. I know, he said, shoulder slumping. And I hope I'm wrong. God, I hope I'm wrong. Before I could respond, the door opened again. Richard stood there, crisp shirt, tailored slacks, hair perfectly combed. Well, look at my 2 favorite people, he announced, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. He seemed startled to see Nate.
Big day, son, he said, clapping Nate on the shoulder. You should be getting ready. Then he turned to me. And you, Claire, you'll wear yourself out. Lila's coming by at 10 to go over the seating chart. Some last-minute adjustments with her parents' table. Nate's expression tightened. What adjustments? Oh, Richard waved dismissively, making sure her parents aren't near your Uncle James after that Christmas blow-up. You know how particular the Ellingtons are. We'll handle it privately, delicate politics and all. Of course, Nate said, voice hollow. Wouldn't want the wrong people sitting together. The air thickened. I watched my husband and my son, and in that moment I knew. Nate wasn't imagining things. Something was rotting at the heart of our family. After they left, a cold dread settled in my bones. I was supposed to call the caterer at 10:30, a call I'd planned for weeks. Instead, I dialed and lied. Family emergency, need to reschedule. The truth was, I'd cleared my morning. I needed to see for myself. For 2 hours, I played the part of the happy mother, tidying a spotless kitchen, rearranging centerpieces, jumping at every sound. At exactly 10 a.m., a sleek white BMW pulled into the driveway. Lila stepped out, radiant even in jeans and a silk blouse. She walked to the front door like she owned the place. Heart pounding, I slipped out the back and crept around the house, crouching behind the hydrangeas beside the living room window. Through the bay glass, I saw them, Richard pouring her a drink by the fireplace, the same spot where we'd taken Christmas photos for 20 years. They stood too close. His hand rested low on her back, lingering. I dug my nails into my palms. Then, movement upstairs, a shadow in the hallway mirror. Nate. He was watching too. Downstairs, Lila's hand moved to Richard's chest. She leaned in, laughing at something he said. He laughed back, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Light, genuine, alive. Then he kissed her. Not a peck, a deep, hungry kiss, full of promise. My vision burned red. I stood to charge in, but a hand gripped my arm. Nate. Pale, shaking, eyes blazing with a cold fury I'd never seen. Mom, don't, he whispered, not yet. I know what it is, he said, steady despite trembling hands. I've known for weeks. I stared at my son, the boy I raised, now a man forged in betrayal. I stopped this, I hissed. No, he said sharply, we have a plan. And in that moment, crouched in the dirt behind the flowers I'd so lovingly grown, I realized the woman I used to be was already gone. Tell me the plan. That evening was one of the strangest of my life. Richard came home acting as if nothing had happened, humming as he adjusted his cufflinks and asked about the final catering arrangements. Lila had left hours earlier, and he was the picture of the doting husband and proud father. He even rehearsed his toast for the reception, voice thick with manufactured emotion, saying how honored he was to welcome Lila into our family. The hypocrisy was so thick I could barely swallow. I nodded and smiled, an empty shell playing the role of the happy mother, while inside I screamed. Every word out of his mouth felt like salt in an open wound. After he went to bed, still wearing that smug, self-satisfied expression, I met Nate in my home office. The door was locked, the blinds drawn. It felt less like a workspace and more like a war room, and in many ways it was. On my desk lay the beginnings of a file that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Screenshots, timestamps, and a single photo of Richard and Lila pressed against his car in a shadowed parking garage. "Tell me about that detective," I said, staring at a surveillance image that twisted my stomach into knots. "Her name is Maya Whitfield." The name hit me like a splash of ice water. Maya? My younger sister, the one who'd walked out of our childhood home at 17 and never looked back, except to check in on me every few months with a postcard or a cryptic text. We'd grown apart, but never truly disconnected. "Maya," I whispered. Nate nodded. I didn't know who else to call. I knew she'd retired from the Charleston PD after 20 years and started her own private investigation firm. I also knew she'd never liked Dad. A sharp, broken laugh escaped me, more sob than sound. Of course, Maya had always seen through Richard's charm. She'd warned me once, years ago, after a family barbecue, where he'd flirted shamelessly with a neighbor. "He's got that look in his eyes, Claire, the kind that never stays put." I'd brushed her off, too proud, too afraid to admit my marriage might be crumbling. "I'll call her," I said, voice thick. Maya answered on the second ring. "Claire, it's past midnight. Is everything okay?" "No, Maya," I said, and then the dam broke. I told her everything. Nate's suspicions, what we'd witnessed that morning, the photos, the kiss by the fireplace. I cried ugly, gasping sobs for the first time all day. She listened in silence, her voice calm when she finally spoke. "I'm not surprised, Claire. I've seen the way he looks at that girl. I was hoping I was wrong." "Nate had already told me about the photos," I said, wiping my eyes. "What else do you have?" "More than you probably want to know," she replied, her tone shifting into professional detachment. "I've been tracking their movements for 3 weeks. They meet twice a week like clockwork at the St. Regis Charleston. He always pays in cash. Last week, he took her to Cartier." My skin burned. Our money. The money I managed so carefully, the money meant for retirement, for emergencies, for Nate's future, not for diamond necklaces and secret hotel rooms. "And Claire," Maya added, her voice softening, "there's something else, something bigger." I braced myself. "What?" A long pause. "It's not just Lila. It's not the first time." She'd found a series of monthly payments going back 15 years. Always to the same person, Diane Carter. "Who is she?" I asked.
"A junior associate at his old firm when Nate was a toddler. She left abruptly 15 years ago. The payments started a few months after she vanished." Maya took a breath. "Claire, she has a daughter, Avery, 15 years old. I ran a background check. No father listed on the birth certificate, but I'd bet my license Richard is hers." The phone slipped in my hand. I couldn't breathe. A daughter? A whole other child. 15 years of lies, secret trips, mysterious expenses, the emotional distance. It all clicked into horrifying clarity. "I have to know for sure," I whispered. "I know," Maya said. "I'll handle it. But Claire, you have to be prepared. When this drops, it's going to be a nuclear bomb." "I know," I said, my voice cold and hard. "That's exactly what we're counting on." The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated deception. I moved through wedding preparations like a ghost, smiling at relatives, approving floral arrangements, even helping Richard with his tie, my fingers brushing the silk as I imagined tightening it around his neck. Every interaction was performance. Every polite word, a lie. Maya worked fast. She was a professional, but this was personal. That night, after Richard fell asleep beside me, snoring softly in the bed we'd shared for 25 years, I crept out of the room. My heart hammered with every creak of the floorboard. In the bathroom, I took his toothbrush from its holder. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped it. It felt like the ultimate violation. But what was this compared to the violations he'd committed? Against me, against Nate, against our entire life. I tucked the brush into a sealed plastic bag and left it in the mailbox before dawn. Maya collected it before sunrise. The next day, as florists arranged peonies and photographers tested lighting, Maya called. She said, "I've got more on the money," she said, voice grim. "It's worse than we thought." We met in my car parked down the street, away from the house, away from prying eyes. She opened her laptop. On the screen, a spreadsheet of staggering deceit. She analyzed your joint accounts, retirement funds, everything. She pointed to a highlighted column. For years, Richard's been making small cash withdrawals, $500 here, $700 there, never over $1,000, always from different branches. "I thought it was for his coin collection," I said, stunned. "He always said rare coins required cash." "Another lie," she said dryly. "His real hobby was named Leela." She clicked another tab. "He's been taking loans against your pension plan." I stared. There it was, $60,000 drained in the last 18 months. How? He needed my signature. "He forged it," she said quietly. "I compared it to your tax returns. It's good, but it's not yours." Nausea rolled through me. This wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. He was dismantling our future to fund his affair. "And Leela?" I asked, voice barely audible. "She's not innocent," Maya said, eyes hard. "She's embezzling from her law firm. Over $200,000 in fake invoices and inflated expenses. Some of that money traced directly to gifts for Richard. A perfect circle of corruption. She stole to buy him gifts. He stole from me to buy her gifts." Then Maya handed me a manila envelope. The DNA results came in this morning. I opened it with trembling hands. At the bottom of the page, probability of paternity 99.999%. Avery Carter was Richard's daughter. 15 years. 15 years of loving him, trusting him, building a life while he had another child, another secret family, just 20 miles away. I rested my head on the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I was beyond tears. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me. The pain was still there, a gaping wound, but now it was edged with steel. He wasn't just going to lose his wife. He was going to lose everything. "Okay," I said, looking Maya in the eye. "The wedding plan. Let's go over it one more time. I want it to be perfect." Because now it wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about justice, about protecting Nate, about making sure Richard and Leela faced consequences for every lie, every stolen dollar, every shattered promise. And as I sat in that car holding proof of a double life I never knew existed, I realized the woman who believed in forgiveness, in second chances, was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who knew the truth was the only weapon that couldn't be disarmed. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and cruelly cheerful. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains of my bedroom, glinting off the silver frames of family photos that now felt like relics from a fabricated past. I dressed in silence, choosing a soft lavender dress that matched the bridesmaid's palette. It was a small act of control in a day designed to spiral beyond anyone's grasp. Downstairs, the house buzzed with activity. Florists arranged peonies in crystal vases. The string quartet tuned their instruments on the patio. Guests began to arrive. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, Richard's colleagues from the firm, Leela's parents in tailored linen suits that cost more than my monthly income. Everyone smiled, hugged, complimented the weather. No one knew they were walking into a courtroom disguised as a garden party. Maya arrived just after 11 a.m., dressed in a black catering uniform with a discreet name tag that read Avery, a nod to the daughter Richard had hidden for 15 years. She gave me a subtle nod from across the foyer, her eyes sharp and steady. Her laptop was already connected to the main projector under the guise of managing the slideshow. All it would take was one click. Nate found me in the kitchen, pretending to inspect a tray of canapes. His hands were steady, but his eyes burned with the same cold fire I'd seen behind the hydrangeas. "You're okay, Mom?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Are you?" He exhaled. "I keep thinking about Avery. She's just a kid. She didn't ask for any of this." "She's your sister," I said, voice thick, "and today she'll finally be seen." He squeezed my shoulder. "We're doing the right thing."
Then Leela appeared at the end of the aisle. She floated toward us in a gown of ivory silk, her hair swept into an elegant twist, diamonds glinting at her throat, the same necklace Richard had bought with our retirement money. She beamed at the crowd, the picture of poised perfection. But then her eyes found Richard's. For a fraction of a second, their gazes locked, intimate, conspiratorial, triumphant. They thought they'd won. They thought the wedding would seal their secret life and legitimacy. They had no idea we'd already built the gallows. Nate stood at the altar, calm as stone. When Leela reached him, he took her hand without flinching. He played his part flawlessly, smiling faintly, nodding at the officiant's words about love and fidelity. But every time his eyes met mine, I saw the same unspoken signal: ready. The ceremony droned on. Vows were exchanged, empty words wrapped in lace and tradition. My stomach churned with every syllable. These weren't promises. They were performances. Then came the moment. "If anyone here knows of any just cause or impediment why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. I stood. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. 300 faces turned toward me, curious, confused, already sensing the shift in the air. Richard stiffened. "Claire, sit down," he hissed, grabbing my wrist. "You're ruining everything." I yanked my arm free. "No, Richard, you did that." I stepped forward, clutching the small remote Maya had given me. My voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and carried across the hushed garden like a blade. "I do have a reason. In fact, I have several." Leela's smile faltered. Her father, Judge Ellington, rose from his seat, his face darkening. "Mrs. Whitfield, what is the meaning of this disruption?" "The meaning, Your Honor," I said, meeting his gaze, "is that your daughter is about to marry my son while carrying on an affair with his father, and that's only the beginning." Before he could respond, I pressed the button. The screen behind the altar flickered to life. The first image, Richard and Leela locked in a deep kiss in our living room, the very spot where we'd opened Christmas presents for 23 years. Gasps erupted. Leela's mother covered her mouth. Richard shot to his feet. "That's fake. Claire has gone mad." But the screen changed. Next, surveillance photos of them entering the St. Regis Charleston. Timestamps visible. Then another, Richard slipping cash to a concierge. Then Leela wearing the Cartier necklace, laughing as Richard fastened it around her neck during what he had claimed was a business lunch. The crowd fell silent. This wasn't just gossip. This was evidence. And if you think this is just about infidelity, let's talk about money. The screen shifted again. Bank statements filled the display. Highlighted withdrawals, forged signatures on pension loan documents, a $15,000 receipt from Cartier. Murmurs turned to stunned whispers. I saw Leela's law partners in the fourth row exchange furious glances. But the real betrayal, I said, pausing for effect, didn't start with Leela. The final slide appeared. A DNA report. Bold letters. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. Beneath it, a photo of a 15-year-old girl with Richard's dark eyes and sharp smile. This is Avery Carter, Richard's daughter, a child he's kept hidden from me and from Nate for her entire life. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Then Leela collapsed. She crumpled onto the grass in a heap of silk and shattered illusions, sobbing into her hands. Her mother rushed to her side, face ashen. Judge Ellington stood frozen, his reputation crumbling in real time. Richard, meanwhile, turned and bolted. He shoved through the crowd, knocking over a champagne tower in his panic. But Maya was waiting. As he sprinted toward the driveway, she stepped out from behind an oak tree and extended her foot. He tripped hard, skidding across the manicured lawn in his tuxedo. "Going somewhere, Richard?" she asked, her voice deceptively light. He scrambled to his feet, wild-eyed. "Get off me! This is harassment!" Maya gripped his arm. "Actually, it's citizen arrest prep. But don't worry, we're not here for you. Yet." At that moment, two uniformed officers entered the garden, moving with quiet authority. They weren't here for Richard's fraud. That would be handled in civil court. They were here for Leela. "Leela Ellington?" one officer asked. She looked up, mascara streaking her cheeks. "No, please!" "You are under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud," the officer said, snapping cuffs around her wrists. The click echoed like a gunshot. Her law partners stood, faces grim. One pulled out a phone, likely calling their firm's legal team. The scandal wouldn't end here. It would ripple through Charleston's elite for months. As the police led Leela away, still in her wedding dress, Nate came to my side. He wrapped an arm around me, his voice low. "It's over, Mom." But it wasn't. Not yet. Richard, now back on his feet, tried to slip away again. Maya blocked his path. "You're not leaving," she said. "Not until you see what you've done." She turned him toward the screen, now showing us side by side. Nate at 5, holding a soccer trophy, and Avery at 5, holding a science fair ribbon. Same eyes, same smile. Brothers and sisters separated by lies. Richard's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. Shame. But shame doesn't undo 15 years of theft. It doesn't restore stolen futures or heal broken trust. Guests began to leave, some in stunned silence, others whispering furiously into their phones. Photographers who'd come to capture a fairy tale now documented a public implosion, their flashes popping like gunshots in the golden afternoon light. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of the life I'd built, and felt something unexpected: relief. The truth had been a bomb, but bombs cleared the ground for something new to grow. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone and the caterers had packed up the untouched cake, Nate and I sat on the patio in silence. The rose arch still stood, but the string lights now felt hollow, mocking. "What now?" he asked. I looked at him, my son, my co-conspirator, my anchor. Now, I said, we rebuild. Not the life we had, but the one we deserve. And for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. The chaos that followed the wedding implosion was both surreal and strangely cathartic. Guests scattered like startled birds, some fleeing in silence, others whispering into their phones as if reporting live from a war zone. The string quartet stopped playing. The florist stood frozen beside a toppled vase of peonies. And in the center of it all, Leela sobbed into her mother's shoulder, her wedding dress now a symbol of public disgrace rather than celebration. Maya kept a firm grip on Richard's arm as he struggled to regain his composure. His face was flushed with humiliation, his tailored tuxedo smeared with grass stains from his fall. "This is a setup," he shouted, voice cracking. "Claire's gone insane. She's trying to destroy me." Maya didn't flinch. "Keep talking, Richard. Every word just digs your grave deeper." Nate stayed close to me, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply stood tall, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the wreckage of a future he'd narrowly escaped. The police led Leela away in handcuffs, her diamond earrings glinting under the golden afternoon sun like mocking trophies. Her father, Judge Ellington, didn't try to stop them. He stood rigid, his expression unreadable, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the devastation beneath his judicial composure. His daughter, his legacy, his pride, gone in a single afternoon. As the crowd thinned, I walked back to the house, my lavender dress brushing against the rose petals scattered across the lawn. The arch I'd nurtured from thorns still stood, absurdly beautiful against the ruin. I reached out and snapped one of the stems. The thorns pricked my fingers, drawing a bead of blood. It felt fitting. Inside, the silence was heavier than before. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a crime scene. Every photo on the wall, every piece of furniture, every memory was now tainted by the truth. Maya found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at the untouched cake. "You did it," she said softly. "You actually did it." "I had no choice," I replied, voice hollow. "If we hadn't exposed them, they would have kept lying. To Nate, to everyone." She nodded. "Justice isn't always pretty, but today it was necessary." Later that evening, after the last photographer had left and the caterers had packed up the uneaten hors d'oeuvres, Nate and I sat on the back porch in silence. The sky darkened, stars emerging one by one. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "Do you think she knew about Avery?" I sighed. "I don't know, but it doesn't matter. She chose to be part of his lies anyway." He looked at me, eyes searching. "What happens now, Mom?" I took his hand. "Now, we heal. Slowly, painfully, but honestly." The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly. News outlets had already picked up the story. Charleston wedding scandal. Groom's father exposed in affair with fiancée. DNA test reveals secret daughter. My face was splashed across local headlines. Strangers were dissecting my life on social media. Some called me brave. Others called me cruel. A few even accused me of staging the whole thing for attention. I turned off my phone and poured a cup of coffee. None of it mattered. The truth was out. That was all that mattered. By noon, my attorney called. "Claire, I've reviewed the evidence Maya compiled. Between the forged loan documents, the pension theft, and the DNA proof, we can file for an emergency divorce with full asset protection. Richard won't stand a chance." "Do it," I said, "today." While my lawyer prepared the paperwork, Maya brought me a manila envelope. Inside was a letter from Diane Carter, Avery's mother. "Claire, I never meant for any of this to come to light the way it did. I've lived with this secret for 15 years, not out of malice, but out of fear. Avery deserves to know her brother. If you're willing, she'd like to meet you and Nate. Diane Carter. My hands trembled as I read the letter. This woman had been living just 20 miles away, raising my husband's daughter with money stolen from our marriage. But yet, Avery was innocent. She didn't ask for any of this. I showed the letter to Nate that evening. He read it in silence, then looked up, eyes glistening. "She's my sister, Mom. We can't punish her for his sins." I nodded. "Then we'll meet her." But before we could move forward, Richard made one last desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling world. He showed up at my doorstep 3 days after the wedding, unshaven, eyes bloodshot, wearing a wrinkled shirt that still smelled faintly of hotel soap and regret. "Claire, please," he said, voice raw. "Can we talk?" I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. There's nothing left to say. I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake, but I love you. I've always loved you. I almost laughed. "You don't love me, Richard. You love the idea of me, the woman who kept your life running so you could play house while building another one behind my back." He flinched. "I'm in therapy. I'm trying to understand why I did this." "Good," I said coldly, "but therapy won't give Nate back the father he thought he had. It won't return the $60,000 you stole from our future. And it won't erase the fact that you have a 15-year-old daughter you've hidden from us for her entire life." He looked down, shame finally overtaking his arrogance. I wanted you to know I'm sorry."
"I forgive you," I said, surprising even myself. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your betrayal in my bones any longer. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. You're dead to me, Richard, and to Nate." He nodded slowly, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand." He turned and walked away without another word. I watched him go, feeling not anger, but relief. The ghost of my husband was finally leaving. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks later. I kept the house, the business, and a significant portion of his remaining assets as restitution for the financial fraud. Richard moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Charleston, his career in ruins, his name synonymous with scandal. Lila, meanwhile, accepted a plea deal. 2 years in a low-security facility, full repayment of the embezzled funds. Her law license was suspended indefinitely. The Ellington name, once untouchable in Charleston society, was now whispered with pity and scorn. But the most complicated chapter was just beginning. 2 weeks after the wedding's implosion, silence became my closest companion. The house, once filled with the hum of preparations, laughter, and the illusion of normalcy, now echoed with emptiness. Every room held a ghost. The kitchen, where I'd reheated coffee while pretending to smile. The patio, where betrayal bloomed under string lights. The living room where my husband kissed my son's fiancée like she was the only woman who'd ever mattered. But amid the wreckage, something unexpected began to grow. Clarity. Nate moved back home temporarily, not out of obligation, but because we both needed the quiet solidarity of shared grief. He spent his days sketching in the sunroom, designs for rooftop gardens, healing spaces, urban sanctuaries. He'd always loved architecture, but now his work carried a new depth, as if he were trying to rebuild not just structures, but meaning. One evening, as we sat on the back porch, watching fireflies flicker over the overgrown lawn, he said, "I keep thinking about Avery, about how she must feel." I nodded. "She didn't choose any of this. She's just a girl who found out her father has another family, and that her half-brother watched it all collapse on his wedding day."
It's surreal, he murmured. But I want to know her. Really know her. I reached for his hand. Then we will. 2 days later, I called Diane. Her voice was cautious, guarded, but not hostile. She said, I never wanted this to happen the way it did. Avery saw the news. She's been quiet since. I understand, I replied. But Nate wants to meet her, and I think it's the right thing to do. We agreed on a neutral place, a small cafe in Somerville, halfway between our homes. The morning of the meeting, I couldn't eat. My stomach twisted with a mix of dread and hope. What would I say to the living embodiment of my husband's betrayal, and to the girl who looked like Richard but carried none of his deceit? When they walked in, time seemed to slow. Diane was unassuming, mid-40s, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, no jewelry. Behind her stood Avery, clutching a worn copy of The Secret Garden. She was tall for 15, with Richard's sharp cheekbones but softer features, and eyes that held a quiet intelligence.
Nate stood immediately. Hi, he said gently. I'm Nate. Avery looked up, nervous but curious. Hi. They sat across from each other, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then Nate pointed to her book. That's one of my favorites. A flicker of relief crossed her face. Mine too. And just like that, the ice cracked. They talked about books, school, favorite movies. Nate told her about his dream of designing therapeutic gardens for hospitals. Avery lit up when she mentioned her love for marine biology. Diane watched them, her expression a mix of sorrow and gratitude. I stayed mostly silent, observing the fragile bridge forming between them. This wasn't reconciliation. It was discovery. Two siblings separated by lies, finding each other in the aftermath. Before we left, Avery turned to me. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't trust myself to speak, so I simply nodded. But inside, something shifted. She wasn't a threat. She was a child caught in the crossfire of adult failures, and she deserved better than to be punished for them. That night, Nate said, "She's really cool, Mom." "I know," I replied, "and she's your sister." Meanwhile, the legal fallout continued. Richard's firm terminated him within 48 hours of the scandal going public. His big promotion vanished along with his reputation. He tried to spin the story, claiming I was emotionally unstable, that the evidence was fabricated, but no one believed him. Not when the bank records, forged signatures, and DNA report were all publicly referenced in court filings. My attorney secured a temporary restraining order to prevent him from accessing any joint accounts. Then came the divorce hearing. I walked into the courtroom not as the wronged wife, but as a woman reclaiming her life. Richard sat across the aisle, pale and diminished. He didn't look at me. When the judge read the terms, full custody of the marital home, 70% of remaining assets due to financial fraud, immediate repayment of the $60,000 pension theft, he flinched, but didn't argue. He knew he'd lost. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks after the wedding that never was. I sold the Charleston estate. Too many memories clung to every wall, every rose bush, every polished floorboard. I bought a modest townhouse near the harbor, small, bright, and mine alone. No grand foyer, no patio for weddings, just a quiet space where I could breathe. Nate helped me move. As we unpacked boxes in the new kitchen, he said, "You okay, Mom?" I looked around at the bare walls, the unfamiliar light. I will be. And for the first time, I believed it. Lila's fate unfolded in parallel. Her law firm filed a civil suit for embezzlement. The criminal charges stuck. She accepted a plea deal. 2 years in a minimum security facility, full restitution, and permanent disbarment. Her parents, once pillars of Charleston society, retreated from public life. Judge Ellington resigned from the bench early, citing personal reasons. The scandal didn't just ruin Lila, it dismantled a dynasty. I didn't gloat.
There was no satisfaction in watching someone's world burn, even if they'd helped set the fire. But I felt no guilt either. Justice wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Maya checked in weekly. "You holding up?" she'd ask. "Better than I expected," I'd reply. She'd smile. "You're stronger than you think, Claire." One afternoon, she brought over a folder. I ran a final audit on Richard's finances, found something else. I braced. She opened a safety deposit box under a fake name 2 months ago. Inside, a birth certificate for Avery, a lock of her baby hair, and a letter addressed to you. My breath caught. What did it say? Maya handed me a copy. "Claire, if you're reading this, I failed you beyond repair. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know I never stopped loving you. I just lost myself. Avery is innocent. Please, if you can, let her be part of your life. She deserves family. End." I stared at the words, then folded the letter and tucked it into my desk drawer. Not because I believed him, but because Avery deserved to know her father had, at the very end, tried to do one decent thing. Months passed. Seasons turned. The media moved on to newer scandals. My CPA firm slowly regained its footing. Clients who'd left out of discomfort returned, drawn by the quiet dignity of a woman who'd faced betrayal and refused to break. Nate enrolled in a graduate program for landscape architecture. His first project? A memorial garden for families fractured by hidden truths, dedicated to those who rebuild after the storm. And Avery? She became a regular presence in our lives. She came for Sunday dinners. She and Nate binged old sci-fi shows. She helped me plant herbs in my tiny backyard. One evening, as we washed dishes side by side, she said, "Do you hate me?" I turned off the faucet. "No, Avery, I could never hate you. You're not your father's choices. You're your own person." She wiped her hands on a towel, eyes glistening. I didn't want to be a reminder of what he did. "You're not," I said firmly. "You're a reminder that good things can still grow from broken places." Later that night, I sat on my balcony, watching the harbor lights shimmer on the water. The pain hadn't vanished. It had transformed. It was no longer a wound, but a scar, proof I'd survived. I thought of the woman who'd crouched behind hydrangeas, trembling with betrayal. She'd been shattered, but from those pieces, something new had emerged, not perfect, not whole in the old way, but honest. And honesty, I realized, was the only foundation worth building on. A year after the wedding that never was, life had settled into a rhythm I never could have predicted, but one I was learning to trust. The chaos of headlines, police reports, and public accusations, whispers had faded into the background hum of a city that had already moved on to its next scandal. But for us, the aftershock still rippled beneath the surface, quiet, persistent, shaping who we were becoming. I sold the Charleston estate in early spring. The roses I'd nurtured for years were dug up and replanted in a community garden downtown. It felt like releasing ghosts. The house had been too full of echoes, of Richard's laughter in the foyer, of Nate's childhood footsteps on the stairs, of Leela's practiced charm in the dining room. I couldn't live inside a museum of lies. My new home was a modest townhouse near the harbor, 2 bedrooms, a sunlit kitchen, and a tiny balcony where I kept potted herbs. No grand arches, no sprawling lawns, just space to breathe. And for the first time in decades, I slept through the night. My CPA firm, once teetering on the edge of collapse, slowly regained its footing. Clients who'd left out of discomfort began returning, not out of pity, but respect. Word had spread not just about the scandal, but about how I'd handled it, with dignity, precision, and unflinching truth. I even took on a new client, a nonprofit that supported women rebuilding after financial abuse. It felt like purpose, not just profit. Nate thrived in ways I hadn't dared hope for. He left his corporate job and enrolled in a graduate program for landscape architecture.
His thesis project yet? A therapeutic garden for trauma survivors, complete with quiet reflection zones, sensory pathways, and a central fountain shaped like a broken circle mending itself. He called it After the Storm. When I saw the renderings, I cried, not from sadness, but from awe. My son wasn't just healing, he was creating healing for others. He also started dating again. Her name was Lena, a librarian with kind eyes and a dry wit who listened like every word mattered. She didn't know the full story at first. When Nate finally told her, over coffee on their third date, she didn't flinch. "You're not your father, and you're not your past," she'd said simply. He brought her to dinner at my place a month later. She hugged me like she already knew me. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in him since he was a boy: peace. But the most unexpected transformation came through Avery. What began as cautious Sunday dinners evolved into something real. She'd show up with books she thought Nate would like or ask me for help with her college applications. She had Richard's sharp mind, but Diane's quiet empathy. She loved marine biology, hated cilantro, and could quote entire scenes from Star Trek: The Next Generation. She was, in every way that mattered, Nate's sister. One rainy afternoon, as we baked cookies in my kitchen, she asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I paused, flour dusting my hands. Richard? No, not the man he became. But I miss the idea of him, the husband I thought I married. That's a different kind of grief. She nodded, stirring chocolate chips into the batter. I used to dream he'd show up at my school play or come to my soccer games. Now I'm glad he didn't. It would have just been another performance. Her honesty stunned me. At 15, she already understood the cost of living in someone else's illusion. Diane and I never became close, but we developed a quiet respect. We met occasionally, always with Nate and Avery present, and spoke in careful, measured tones. She carried guilt like a second skin, but she'd also protected Avery as best she could. I couldn't forgive the deception, but I could acknowledge her humanity. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Richard's familiar script. Claire, I don't expect a reply. I don't deserve one. But I needed you to know I've started therapy. Not because I think it fixes what I've done, but because I owe it to Avery to be more than a ghost in her life. I've cut ties with Leela. She's in prison, and I won't be visiting. I've also repaid the $60,000 to your pension account. It's not enough. It never will be. But it's a start. Tell Nate I'm proud of him. And if Avery ever asks about me, tell her the truth, but tell her I loved her, even when I failed her. Richard. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and placed it in the same drawer as his earlier letter, the one found in the safety deposit box. Not because I believed him, but because Avery deserved to have both sides of her father's story, however flawed. I showed it to Nate that evening. He read it in silence, then handed it back. He's trying. That doesn't undo anything, but it's something. Do you want to see him? He shook his head. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'm glad he's doing right by Avery.
Diane and I had found a fragile peace. We'd never be friends, but we'd become something equally valuable. Allies in Avery's future. We coordinated college visits, shared medical records, and even attended parent-teacher conferences together. There was no warmth between us, but there was respect. And sometimes, that's enough. Richard, meanwhile, had faded into the background of our lives. He'd moved to a small coastal town an hour north, working as a bookkeeper for a marina. He sent Avery birthday cards, always signed, never pushy. He'd repaid the last of the stolen pension funds 6 months ago, and once, on the anniversary of the wedding, he'd left a single white rose on my doorstep with a note that read, "I'm trying." I didn't respond, but I kept the note. He'd asked to meet Avery again, just once. She'd agreed, on her terms, in a public cafe, with Maya nearby as a silent guardian. Afterward, she told me, he cried the whole time. He kept saying he was sorry for not being there. She paused, stirring her tea. I don't know if I'll ever forgive him, but I don't hate him anymore. That was enough. Lila served her full sentence. She was released early for good behavior, but her life in Charleston was over. Her parents had relocated to Miami. Her legal license remained revoked. I heard she now worked as a legal assistant under a different name in Savannah. She never reached out, and I never expected her to. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, and hers had been drawn in steel. My CPA firm, once teetering on the edge of collapse, had not only survived, it had thrived. I'd shifted my focus to financial counseling for women rebuilding after betrayal. I'd even started a small nonprofit offering free workshops on financial literacy and asset protection. Clients came not just for my expertise, but because they knew I understood what it meant to have your future stolen and how to take it back. Maya remained my anchor. She'd closed her PI firm and opened a community center for at-risk teens. Too much darkness in the world, she'd said. Time to build something light. We met every Friday for coffee. She never asked if I missed Richard. She knew the answer. One rainy afternoon, as we sat by the window watching the harbor disappear behind sheets of rain, she said, "You know, Claire, you didn't just survive that day. You rewrote the rules." I smiled. I just refused to let them win. "No," she corrected gently. "You chose truth over comfort. And that's the bravest thing anyone can do." Later that week, Nate invited me to his graduate thesis exhibition. His project, After the Storm, was a full-scale model of a therapeutic garden for trauma survivors. Winding paths led to quiet nooks, each named for a stage of healing: denial, anger, truth, rebuilding, peace. At the center stood a bronze sculpture of 2 hands, one old, one young, reaching toward each other across a broken circle. I said, "It's us." Tears in my eyes. He replied, "It's all of us." After the exhibition, Lena pulled me aside. "He talks about you all the time," she said softly, "about how you taught him that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when everything's broken." I hugged her. He taught me the same thing. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, journal in hand. I didn't write about betrayal or loss. I wrote about Avery's laugh, Nate's quiet strength, Maya's unwavering loyalty. I wrote about the lavender blooming in my garden, the way the harbor lights shimmered on calm nights, and the peace that came from knowing I'd chosen truth, even when it shattered everything. I thought of the woman who'd crouched behind hydrangeas, trembling with fear. She'd been shattered, but from those pieces, something new had grown, not perfect, not whole in the old way, but real. And real, I'd learned, was more than enough. The next morning I woke early, not from anxiety, but from anticipation. Avery was leaving for college in 3 weeks. We had a list of errands, dorm supplies, textbooks, one last beach day. As I brewed coffee, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, warm and golden. My phone buzzed. A text from Nate. "Breakfast at 9? I'm bringing pancakes." I smiled. "Only if you bring extra syrup." As I waited, I looked around my small, sunlit kitchen. No grand estate, no rose arch, no illusion of perfection. Just a quiet space filled with love, honesty, and the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. And for the first time in years, I felt not just free, but whole.